Mr Speaker.
I call Chris Bishop.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Budget 2016 was delivered by our great Minister of Finance at a time of great global economic uncertainty, and actually those uncertainties have only increased in recent days with the Brexit, the British exit from the European Union. And I was thinking over the weekend, sir, as I remained transfixed watching the television, the BBC coverage and the Sky News coverage, I was reflecting over the weekend of the seismic political and economic events in my lifetime. And I was 6, possibly 7 when the Berlin Wall fell. And I don't really remember the Berlin Wall falling, but I certainly remember 9/11. I certainly remember the attack on the Twin Towers. And I was thinking over the weekend, what is comparable to 9/11? And I don't think Brexit meets it, but it's certainly probably second in terms of the big political and economic events of my lifetime. And I've got to say, I'm a bit of an optimist about the exit from the European Union by Britain. I think Britain is fundamentally a great country, and its history demonstrates that it's versatile and adaptive, and it will cope with exiting from the European Union, as indeed we will cope with it as well. But certainly in the short term, and the initial response from the markets in the short term was panic. I think probably in the few hours post the decision, as we watched during the day on Friday as those Leave votes tallied up in the northeast and then increasingly around the country. And isn't it an interesting irony of the whole situation that all the exciting things in British politics happen at the middle of the night? They vote till 10 o'clock and the results come in at 4 a.m. and it's sort of nice for us because it's 4 p.m. in the afternoon and we can watch it all happen. But I think economic uncertainty has increased in the days following the Brexit vote. So the question really is, now more than ever before, we need a budget like Budget 2016 that this appropriations bill gives effect to, and we need a government that knows where it's going, that provides the stability and the economic confidence that will allow New Zealand to continue to make its way in the world. And I think this budget does 3 things that are very important in the light of the global economic uncertainty. And we had the Reserve Bank at the Finance and Expenditure Committee that I'm privileged to serve on a couple of weeks ago, talking about how global growth is still weak despite very stimulatory monetary policy around the world. And we look at the EU and we see anaemic growth. We look at the United States, we see fundamentally anemic and sclerotic growth rates. And so this is a time of uncertainty, and I think this budget does 3 things that are very important. Firstly, it moves to increasingly diversify our economy. Secondly, it tries to build an economy based around innovation, based around science and technology. And thirdly, and this appropriations bill gives effect to this, it's a budget that tries to expand our opportunities on the international stage, that tries to grow our export markets, and that is incredibly important in the light of the British exit from the European Union. So on that first point, sir, about the diversification of the New Zealand economy, and when Britain entered the EU in the 1970s, it is fair to say that New Zealand did not respond well. That it was a cataclysmic shock to the New Zealand economy, where 60 or 70% of our exports went to Britain, and that was cut very quickly, not quite overnight, but very, very quickly beyond that. In 2016, sir, we're in a much better position to cope with Britain's exit from the European Union, because we have an increasingly diverse export base, both in terms of the types of goods and services we export, but also the places which they go. And the 4th Labor government from '84 onwards deserves a lot of credit for the important changes to the New Zealand economy that they enacted that have led to that situation, changes that they have turned their back on in some ways, sir, I suggest to the House. But this budget builds on past measures by past governments to diversify the economy. And we're increasingly seeing our ICT sector that we are blessed to have in Wellington and the Hutt Valley, or as I call it, Technology Valley, that ICT sector booming, Mr Speaker. Exports growing at at record pace, jobs being added into that sector of the economy. To report out just last week demonstrating just that, if you look at reports like the TIN 100 and the TIN 200 report, you will see exactly the same. Our tourism sector, under the guidance of Paula Bennett as Associate Minister, and of course the Prime Minister as Minister of Tourism, growing great guns, sir. But something else I want to point to in the estimates is something that I know is of real importance to our regional MPs, people like Sarah Dowie and Stuart Smith, and that's the regional research institutes that are going to increasingly diversify our economy in a regional sense. And I was down in Southland last week with the Regional Development Caucus Committee of the National Party, meeting with the great people down there from Venture Southland, the Southland Economic Development Agency, hearing about their plans for their regional institute, which has been shortlisted, which is about investing in primary industry productivity. I know my colleague Stuart Smith from the great wine-growing province of Marlborough has high hopes for the regional institute that he hopes to establish there, a wine institute. That's exactly what we should be doing as a country, focusing on the regional strengths that we have. And clearly, if you go to a region like Marlborough, or you go down south where they've got aluminium and they've got primary products, or you go to Taranaki with the oil and gas, it obviously makes sense to focus on our strengths, and this budget gives effect to those regional institutes. And I think that's a good thing. Second thing I want to point to is innovation, sir. And every now and then not every now and then, actually, it's a constant refrain from members opposite, that we've got to focus on building an innovative economy. We've got to focus on innovation, and the solution to all of this is always research and development tax credits. They never take that next step and actually look at the broader picture that we need to be investing in. And what this budget gives effect to, sir, is the Innovative New Zealand package, $761 million across the science sector and across our tertiary sector, to invest in the core capabilities of our CRI, to invest in things like the Pre-Seed Accelerator Fund, to increase investment for our incubators in New Zealand, sir, and a range of very important initiatives like that. And it's not true to say, sir, that this is politically directed flunkies handing out science money, as sometimes one particular member opposite mentions. Science funding in New Zealand is arm's length from the Minister. It's given out by independent bodies like the Marsden Fund. And we know it's independent because the Marsden Fund gave Jane Kelsey a large sum of money to issue a study on neoliberalism and the transcendent nature of it in the public policy sphere. And I can assure members that if it was politically directed, the national government probably would not be funding such a project. But that just illustrates the falsity of the claim that this is something that's politically directed. And so it's likewise too, sir, with the other funds that are funded, like the Endeavour Science Fund as well, sir. So this Innovative New Zealand package will lead to more discovery, will lead to more commercialisation of scientific discoveries. And if you go to the Callaghan Innovation campus and the precinct that I'm privileged to have in my neck of the woods in the Hutt Valley, there are a range of highly innovative companies there doing great things, and this budget will help support companies like that. And the third thing I want to mention, sir, and this is what this budget does about expanding our overseas trade opportunities. And we've done a lot in this space already, signing free trade agreements with Malaysia and economic partnership with Taipei, Hong Kong, Korea, and of course the big one of them all, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, sir. And something that hasn't received a lot of press in the budget, but I think is really important, is the new initiative which funds the Centres for Asia-Pacific Excellence, which will be based in our universities. And increasingly our future is not so much with the UK or not so much with the old economies that we've traditionally associated with. Our future is in Asia, and we need more young kids in our universities and more young students studying Asian languages and studying Asian cultures. That's why we've funded things like the Prime Minister's Scholarships for Asia program, which is given effect to in this budget, which sends young New Zealanders offshore to Asian economies and Asian countries to study culture, to learn the language, to enmesh themselves in the cultures of those economies, and then come back to New Zealand, as they invariably do, and add to the knowledge base of this economy. That's why we fund things like that, and it's why we're funding the Centres for Asia-Pacific Excellence. There's going to be 3 of them set up. I think that will be a significant and substantive long-term legacy of this government and this budget. This is a government, sir, that is focused on building an outwardly focused, confident New Zealand on the world stage. I want to end my speech by just cycling back to where I started with, which is, in a time of global uncertainty, what is the correct policy response? Is it to try and insulate ourselves from the rest of the world? Is it to put up the shutters of Fortress New Zealand and retreat to some sort of 1970s utopia that never existed? This government does not believe that's the right answer. This government believes the right answer for New Zealand is to be outwardly focused, confident on the world stage, expand our overseas trade opportunities. I commend this appropriations bill to the House.
Mr. Speaker.
Call, James.